Hello and welcome to Tales from the Oval. I'm Tom Holland. With me is Jon Surtees. And Jon, in our first three episodes, we've already gone through just the history, the backstory of the Oval, how the Oval came to be built, and the early years of Surrey. And then in our last episode, we looked at the birth of the Ashes, Surrey's role as the first test
Yes.
ground in England. But today we're doing something slightly different because throughout this series, we are going to be nominating our choice for the best captain, the best team, the best innings that's been played at the Oval, the best spell of bowling at the Oval. But today we want to look at the person we think was the Surrey GOAT, the Surrey greatest of all time. And I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
who would be on your top three before we come to the number one? So who are which other two
Yeah.
candidates do you think we could have chosen?
I mean, there are so many here. I think the thing with Surrey is we're a real club of eras. You look at the era that we talked about previously in the late 19th century. You got to look at obviously winning 7 titles back to back in the 1950s. You then got to look at the Hollyoake era in the late 90s and the early 2000s, and I would argue the current era is up there with any of them. We're just two titles on the bounce, going for the third as we speak now. But I'd say in terms of that, you've got to mention Stuart Surridge. You really do.
Hmm.
He was captain for 5 years. He won the championship for 5 years. But the thing about Surridge is many people say that he wasn't by any means the best player in that team, and probably if he wasn't captain, may have even struggled to get picked every game. But to be captain for 5 years and to win the title for 5 years consecutively, I think you've got to be in that. You've got to be in that conversation. Um, I think you've got to talk about Tom Richardson, who's the club's all-time leading wicket taker,
Hmm.
another hirsute Victorian great, over 2,000 wickets for the club, and notoriously a hell of a man. He'd apparently walk from Mitcham most days, sometimes carrying his cricket bag with him. Just an extraordinary fella as well. So yeah, I think for me, yeah, Surridge and Richardson are probably worthy of a mention in this conversation, as well as the person I think we're both about to come to.
Yeah. Okay. So our choice for the Surrey GOAT is Sir John Berry Hobbs, Jack Hobbs, and I guess
Yeah,
really there's no contest about that, is there? So let's just go
I don't think
through
so. I don't think so.
some of the kind of the bullet points that I think justify that. So he is the first Surrey cricketer and the first professional cricketer to be knighted. He
Yeah,
remains the highest run scorer in first class cricket. So
yeah,
61,760 runs over the course of his first class career, and also scored the highest number of centuries in first class cricket, a tantalizing 199, which is kind of
yeah.
English
Well,
cricket's equivalent
that's
of
an interesting
Bradman's
one.
average, isn't it?
Well, I think it's an interesting one. It depends which cricket statisticians you speak to as well, because there is an ongoing project, I believe, in that community to look at some of the other cricket that Hobbs played, because there was an argument about which cricket was first class and which cricket wasn't, and there were certain tours of India that he went on where some of games are being sort of posthumously marked as first class games. So there is a an earnest attempt to try and get the master over the line.
Well, I think in a way it's more memorable, a bit like with Bradman's
Yeah,
average, test average. I think there's a kind of
yeah,
heroism
yeah.
in not quite having breasted the tape. He is, of course, the only Surrey cricketer to be widely known as the Master, which was always the nickname that I craved when I began my cricket career. Never quite made it. And of course, he gave his name to the Oval's top gate, didn't he? I mean, I know that
Yeah,
there's the Alex Stewart gate and so on, but I think no one would dispute that the Hobbs gates are very much the top gate. I mean, it's up there with the Grace
I
gates
think
at
so.
Lords. I think as some of the very best gates that you will find at a test ground. And of course, Jon, you love Wisden at the Oval. You've edited a book on it. He is the only Englishman, let alone Surrey player, to have been named as one of the
Yeah,
5 Wisden cricketers of the 20th century. So, I
yeah.
mean, you can't really argue with that.
You
So,
can't argue with that. It's the
shall we,
Bible.
so just who is he? So he's born in 1882. He dies in 1963. And his Surrey career, he first plays for Surrey in 1905, and he plays right the way through to 1934. And he's in 1933, so that's the year before he retires. He's 50, and he scores a double century against the West Indies at the Oval. So he is going very, very strong, well into his sixth decades. In his Test career,
Incredible.
very formidable.
Incredible.
He plays 61 Tests, average of 56.94, 12 centuries against Australia. And although any Australian listeners will be quick to point out that that's almost kind of half of Bradman's, I think it is important, John, isn't it, at this point, to quote the opinion of the great umpire Frank Chester, who umpired Tests throughout the interwar years. And he said, for all his greatness, Bradman had neither the technique nor the skill of Hobbs to succeed on a sticky wicket in favour of the bowlers. And I don't think we're being unduly chauvinist when we say that that's probably the measure of great batsmanship, isn't it? The ability to cope on a sticky wicket. Wouldn't you say? I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Especially in the period those guys played in, like and yeah, the uncovered wickets and all of that. The conditions they were facing would have been unknown in the modern game. So yeah, their ability to adapt to those conditions, I think, is a serious factor. But yeah, anyone who wants to tell me that Hobbs is better than Bradman, I'm ready to listen.
Well, you can't argue with Frank Chester. And
Absolutely
the other thing
not.
about Hobbs, why I think he also deserves his his GOAT title, is that he is widely accepted to have been a delightful man, a kind of charming man, kind man, generous. So Errol Holmes, who was his last captain at Surrey, said of him that he was as straight as a gun barrel, utterly trustworthy, and disliked by no one. So I mean, almost he sounds almost too good to be true. So he was very modest. He was very abstemious. So he brings up his the century with which he equals Grace's total, and he toasts it with what everyone thinks is champagne, but in fact it's lemonade. He's very, very generous to fellow cricketers, to fans, to charities. So John Arlott, who adored him, wrote a brilliant biography of him, said that there was something Christ-like about him, which I mean, maybe he's going a little bit too far.
It's amazing. That's amazing. No, Arlott was a man of poetry.
He was.
Arlott was a man of poetry.
Yes, he
and
was.
It's one of his finest lines. I think, Tom, the difference essentially between our opinions of Hobbs, much as we both revere him, was revealed when you said that when you were younger you wanted to be known as the master. And as you read out that Errol Holmes quote, he was as straight as a gun barrel.
That's what you wanted to be.
Untrustworthy.
Utterly trustworthy.
He was as straight as a gun barrel, utterly trustworthy, and disliked by no one. I think that's I'll take that.
That's
side
what
of his
you
character,
want,
and you can be known as the master. How does that sound?
Well,
that's what I want.
I mean, the other thing is you might want to be, like John Arlott, you want to be compared to Jesus. But I think the thing to say about that is that unlike Jesus, perhaps, I mean, we don't know, but unlike Hobbs, loved a jape. He loved a practical joke. So in that sense, and maybe that sense alone, he was like both them. He was very much a man for putting an ice cube in a sock, that kind of thing. So a very obviously a very charming man as well as a very brilliant cricketer. And the consequence of this is that you have Hobbs Mania, particularly in the 20s. So in the aftermath of the First World War, Britain is looking. It's a hard time economically. Countries are going through a very rough stage, and Hobbs seems like a kind of a ray of sunlight, illuminating the national spirit. And he's one of the most famous people in Britain. So in 1926, there's this journalist, Alfred Gardner, and he writes an essay about Hobbs in which he says, he's as famous as Lloyd George, who'd been Prime Minister, Bernard Shaw, the great writer, Charlie Chaplin, the great actor. And he says that no picture of the life of our time set down in terms of personalities who command the public attention would be complete without him.
Charlie Chaplin, another man of Kennington, of course, as well.
Of course, yes.
So
yeah,
there's quite a quite a high chance that Charlie Chaplin and Hobbs may have passed in the street near St Mark's Church, which is a lovely moment to think about.
Although, of course, as we will as we'll come to, Hobbs is not actually a native of Surrey, which causes him some problems when he
No.
begins his career. But just to say that 1926, when Alfred Gardner is saying this, comparing him to Chaplin and Lloyd George, and saying, he's one of the most famous people in Britain. The year before, this is when he scores the 2 centuries, both against Somerset at Taunton, that enabled him to equal and then take him past W.G. Grace's record for centuries. And to mark it, the cartoonist David Lowe, who is probably best known for the cartoons that he did during the early years of the Second World War, so the famous image of the British soldier standing on a storm-swept rock saying "very well alone." Well, there's another famous cartoon of Churchill leading the coalition government, and they're all rolling up their sleeves, ready for battle. But he shows in 1925, when Hobbs achieved this great record, he showed him as a colossus, and alongside him there are kind of other figures from history. So Adam, Julius Caesar, Charlie Chaplin again, Columbus, Lloyd George again, and very controversially Muhammad. So this generated a lot of brouhaha, I think, in India. People got very upset about it. But you get a sense there that Hobbs is, a colossus among men, a colossus among sportsmen, a colossus among people in Britain. And he appeals to a very broad constituency. So to conservatives, he seems he's the cricketing equivalent of Stanley Baldwin, the pipe-smoking, tweed-wearing prime minister. He's a kind of embodiment of the calm, reassuring coolness of Middle England. And the backdrop to all this is the general strike, anxieties about Bolshevism. So he, in that sense, he seems a kind of stolid embodiment of there'll always be in England. But he's also much admired by socialists, by liberals. So Harold Lasky, who is a Marxist scholar, very influential on the Labour Party, hailed Hobbs for his stolid calm in a difficult position. And John Arlott, of course, who is a liberal, described him as having the untroubled, easy air of a man pottering in his garden. However, despite this aura,
wonderful.
John, just to say, despite this aura of kind of stolid, Hobbit-esque Bilbo Baggins kind of quality, he did once, like Jane Watson, see a ghost. So this was when he was on. This was when he was on a tour, an England tour to Australia, and they were sailing through the Pacific. And it's incredibly hot, so he's sleeping on the deck. And then he sees a weird thing. So he wrote, I appeared into the darkness and saw something white which moved, while all the time it gave periodical groans and gurgles. So who knows what that was?
Well, the thing with ghosts as well is obviously no one knows exactly, what ghosts are, what they do, how they get around. Maybe there's a chance that Shane Watson saw the same ghost as Jack Hobbs.
That's quite a long way from where was it, Chester Street to the Pacific. No, that's ridiculous.
But that's assuming that ghosts travel like human. That's assuming that ghosts travel like humans. I think we know so little about ghosts. We can think maybe ghosts appear to you depending on your profession rather than your physical location.
Well, this podcast is taking an unexpected turn. I hadn't thought that we'd be entering into a debate on the nature of ectoplasm. But it's an interesting theory, John. It's an interesting theory. Let's just leave it there.
I like it.
So, but so here is the question. So he's a massive, massive figure, huge, and he has his gait, and he's in Wisden, and he's the master, and all that. But I think that his fame he's not as famous, say, as Bradman, and he's definitely not as famous as WG.
I think it's a different. You're obviously far more about the social history of the period than I do, but I think he's certainly a less of a physically imposing figure than Grace.
Yeah.
He looks famous as he is. There's a much more of a normality to his look,
He's got a great big grin,
and
hasn't he?
obviously
Great
in
big
the
cheeky
sort of
grin.
very friendly grin. Yeah, but less of the sort of Rasputin like beard
Mm,
that Grace had, and obviously the since the First World War, which we'll come to again later, is a key dividing line, isn't it? And the sort of the nature of celebrity in the interwar years compared to the nature of celebrity in
yeah.
the Victorian years, I think is different. And cricket, by the time Hobbs is playing it, is more established. It's been around for 50 or so years. It's not the new thing anymore. It's a continuation of something that Grace has started. And so yeah, I think without the celebrity of Grace, and without the meaning that Grace imparted to society, I think Hobbs probably would have been less famous. And again, Bradman similarly in the Australian world, there's a different nature to that celebrity. But I love the idea of Hobbs being this sort of keep calm and carry on tea towel embodiment of Middle England, whilst
Yeah,
also being so brilliant. It's been known as the master.
and I think that he absolutely does measure alongside Grace and Bradman in terms of his stature as a cricketer, and he's also a kind of he
Mm.
joins those two titanic figures. So he plays his
Yeah.
first match for Surrey against the Gentlemen of England. We talked about this in a previous episode in 1905 when he
Mm.
makes his debut, and the gentlemen are captained by W.G. Grace, and Hobbs scores 88 in that match in his second innings. And Grace is really, really impressed and says, unless I'm very much mistaken, he's going to be a star. And he was right, because he does become a star.
Oh,
And then Hobbs on his last Ashes tour, 1928 to 29, that's the tour in which Bradman makes his Test debut. So, you think of
yeah.
the
I think it's
chain of great players. Hobbs is the central link.
yeah. I think that's a wonderful happenstance. It really is. Clearly there would have been no planning in that whatsoever. I can't imagine that Hobbs would have thought in any way that on my last Ashes tour to play alongside this man. But I think when you look at it with
Mm.
through the prism of history, for someone to have recorded the career that Hobbs did, to have started with Grace and ended with Bradman is wonderful synchronicity.
Yeah, it really is. So let's just go through his life. So he's not born in Surrey, so this will cause him trouble, as we said. He's born in Cambridge,
Mm.
and Leah McKinstry, who's written the most recent biography of him, excellent account, is
Yep.
he opens his book by saying Cambridge in the late 19th century. You think of punts and straw boaters and things, but this isn't at all the background that Hobbs is born into. So McKinstry says that it was an entirely different world, one of squalor and poverty, of narrow streets and cramped houses, of endless grime and ceaseless work. So his father is a roofer, putting slates on roofs, and his mother is the daughter of a shoemaker. Um, so they are not from prosperous background, and they have lots of children. So Hobbs is the eldest of 12 children, and
Yeah.
he gets an education, um, but it's pretty basic. And I think one of the most touching things that kind of really illustrates his character is that when he becomes famous and people write him fan mail, he answers every letter that he gets, but it costs him effort. It's an effort. It's difficult for him to write, and I just think that's such a kind of
Mm.
moving image of him sitting there struggling to reply to people and to you know
Yeah.
to repay them for their letters and their kindness with kindness of his own.
Yeah.
Um,
That there is a notable preponderance of signed things that I've seen from Hobbs over the years. You'd have thought, given the time that has passed, something signed by Jack Hobbs would be incredibly rare and exciting. But
there's
I
a lot
think
of them.
partially his celebrity and partially his generosity, there is still quite a lot of signed Jack Hobbs things there. I have a signed picture of Jack Hobbs in my study at home, and it cost me I think £30 on eBay, because there's a lot of them out there, and I think that speaks oddly to his character.
Very highly of him. Well, the other thing that I really like about him is he always loved a lunch. And this was because he'd
Yes.
always gone hungry when he
Yes.
was a boy. And so I
Yeah.
think for him, one of the best things about being a famous cricketer was the tea, you know,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
celebratory dinners and things. So he was never happier than when being offered a big meal. So that's a kind
Yeah.
of another
You
marker
get well
of the
fed in cricket.
the poverty of his background. And and one of the things that might not have been thought a promising omen is that his mother kept a duck called Cyril, and the duck would kind of follow her around. Um, and I think if you're going to grow up and be, your ambition is to be a famous batsman, having a duck, I mean
Yeah.
that's
Having
terrible. But
yeah,
actually,
12 children and a duck called Cyril.
it's not a bad portent, because against the fact that his mother keeps the duck is the fact that his father is a really, really keen cricketer. In fact, I mean, obsessed by it, and
Mm.
he ends up uh, becoming the groundsman for Jesus College in Cambridge. And Jesus College is
Mm.
massively hearty. It's it's very much a kind of, we don't really bother with, Latin or whatever. It's all about the sport. So cricket is really, really
Right.
important. And
Okay.
Jack inherits this obsession from his dad. And because his dad has access to all the facilities at Jesus, this means that Jack does as well. And so even though he leaves school at the age of 13 and he works variously as, he's a boot black, so polishing shoes, as an errand boy, as a gas fitter, the whole time cricket is something that he wants to be his life. And obviously he has that
Mm.
aspiration because he gets it from his dad. And he gets, as a boy and then becoming a young man, he gets the chance to play both on excellent wickets, so the Cambridge College wickets, but also on Parker's Piece, the green in the middle of Cambridge, which is much
Yeah.
rougher, and that's essentially where he learns to play, the skills. He hones the skills that will enable him to play on sticky dogs and thereby prove that he's a better batsman than Bradman. Right, John?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
Parker's Piece. You can cricket is still played there to this day.
I've
An
played there.
absolute icon of cricket. I hopefully will be playing there this summer. So yeah,
Yeah.
an absolute. Yeah. If you ever play cricket and you're lucky enough to play on Parker's Piece, you're walking in the shadows of Hobbs there, quite literally.
Yeah, I beat our worst enemies there. It was absolutely brilliant. They cheated
Oh,
the
what a
previous
day!
year by getting a ringer, and so we played them again the following year,
No.
and they scored
Yeah.
something like 420 for one, and it was a time match, and we
Go
scored,
on.
I think, 30 for nine, and we just blocked and blocked and
Oh
blocked.
dear.
It was absolutely brilliant. They were so furious. It's one of my best ever memories.
Oh,
Anyway, but this isn't about
that's
my cricket
wonderful.
career. It's
That's
about
wonderful.
Hobbs's. So,
It's about
so,
Hobbs. Yeah.
so he's
So he's
he,
good.
he's
He's good
good.
as a boy.
He's good, but he doesn't look exceptional. And then there's disaster
Mm.
because his about 15, his dad dies of pneumonia, and this is terrible.
Mm.
There's no welfare state. 12 children, mother, um, huge problems, and so it's really, really pressing now that Hobbs gets secure employment, and it just intensifies his
Mm.
desire to become a cricket professional. And so a colleague of his father,
Yeah,
who's
the
also involved in
desperation.
cricket, writes to Essex County Cricket Club and says, would you give this guy a
Mm.
trial? And Essex never reply. So very bad mistake.
No.
But
Well,
then,
this is one of the great pieces of luck, I think, in the history of Surrey County Cricket Club, is the fact that Jack Hobbs is from Cambridge, because there was nowhere naturally for him to go. They wrote to Essex, being the closest county. They didn't write back. Cheers, Essex. Thank you very much indeed. That's a letter I'd love to see. But yeah, there was no, if he was from Yorkshire or Nottinghamshire or Warwickshire or anywhere else, Sussex, whatever, then he wouldn't have
yeah,
been
but
able to
John,
wash up on
but
on,
against
on the
that,
shores of Surrey.
but it would have been better luck for Surrey if he'd actually been born in Kennington, right? Because then he wouldn't have to qualify. Because this is a period
Well,
when,
that would have been perfect.
yeah, and so it's our friend Lord Hawke. So all these lords who are getting very snitty. He's absolutely obsessed by the fact that only people who are born in counties should play for them. And even though, I mean, Yorkshire famously upholds
Yes.
that, anyone who wants to qualify for Surrey will have to do it for 2 years. So this is something that is a slight shadow
Yeah.
over um, Hobbs, but he does have a break. because your man Tom Hayward sees him, doesn't he? He comes and
Yeah,
gives Hobbs a trial
yeah,
on Parker's piece, and
yeah.
is
One of the great
impressed.
Surrey Victorians.
Yeah, so he's impressed by him, and
Yeah,
Hobbs is hopeful and kind of waiting. So this is in 1902, and then doesn't hear anything all winter, and then in the spring of 1903, so the following year, Hobbs is summoned to see Hayward, who tells him that, yeah, we think you're good. Um, Come to the Oval in April, and you'll be part of a trial, and we'll see what you're made of. And so he goes down and does that. There are lots
yeah,
of trialists turn up. Hobbs is the only trialist who makes the grade, but he is, as we said, then faced with this problem that he's got to qualify. Um, but Surrey are so convinced that Hobbs is the bee's knees, that he's the business, that Hayward persuades our friend Alcock, the great secretary who's organising everything and got the Ashes matches and everything, persuades him to
yes,
include
and
in
everything.
Hobbs's contract the fact that the additional bonus will be paid to him, so that he can basically keep his head above water. So very exciting.
Yeah,
1905, Hobbs makes his debut,
yep.
and he is asked.
Residency complete.
Yeah, his residency is complete. He's not a seasoned opener. This isn't what he's been doing so far. But Tom Hayward needs someone to partner him at the top of the innings, and says, "Come on, do it with me." And as I think we've mentioned several times, I think this is the third time we've mentioned this. He makes his first match
Yeah,
against a gentleman of England, captained by WG. He scores 88. WG is very impressed with him. And then the second match is against Essex, the team that didn't even
yeah.
answer the request
Didn't
to
you
give him a trial.
reply to the letter?
Smacks them for
Yeah,
155. So brilliant, hooray for Hobbs!
there you go.
And this is when
Have
Lord
that.
Dalmany gives him his
Have
cap.
that, Essex.
So we talked about that too.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Which we've referenced that in the
yeah,
past. Yeah,
so this is a tremendous start. It slightly fizzles out, and Leo McKinstry suggests that this is because he's undernourished. That um, he uses up all his energy in the opening matches, and then by kind of August, he's run out of energy, which is a reminder of just how poor a background he comes from. But then 1906, so his second season, much better. He's averaging 40. He's second in Surrey's batting averages, just behind Tom Hayward. And the two of them make a brilliant, brilliant opening partnership. But
mm.
Hobbs is, I think, a naturally shy person. Um,
Mm.
and I think he's overawed by Hayward, both as a sportsman and kind of socially as well.
Mm.
So in September 1906, he gets married, and he marries his childhood sweetheart, Ada. They'd met at church, both of them very, very compatible, both of them completely devoted to one another. And Hobbs is too shy to invite
Yeah.
Hayward to that wedding. So it's
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 just wonderful,
kind
isn't
of
it? I think it speaks again, doesn't it, to the difference between Hobbs and Grace, and that sort of kind of almost kind of omnipresent charisma of some of those Victorians, some of those guys like Grace and Hayward. Hayward famously scored 100 hundreds, but just again the way that the charisma and the character that they projected, and yeah, Hobbs just it's just much more of a diffident guy. I think.
well, I think it is a class
Just
thing as
sort of
well.
happy to make his own way.
WG is a doctor. He's from
Right.
professional classes, and Hobbs isn't. And if he's so
Yeah.
hungry that he lacks he lacks the nourishment to get through a season, I mean that's a real reflection on how important class is in this period of cricket, um, as
Yeah.
arguably it still is
Absolutely.
to this
Well, just
day.
in society and well,
But
yeah. Well,
the,
yes.
but it doesn't stop Hobbs in the years that follow, right the way up to the First World War, basically from establishing himself as the best new cricketer in the whole of England. So in 1907,
Yeah.
he and Hayward put on 4 century opening partnerships in a week, and I think that's still a record. I don't think
In
that's
a
ever been
week.
done. 1907,
It blows my mind.
he goes off on his first tour of Australia. He doesn't see a ghost on this trip, but he does suffer terribly from seasickness. So basically, he only has to look at a kind of, a bath and he feels ill. But he gets to Australia,
Yeah.
makes his debut at
Which,
the
yeah,
MCG.
when you're on an ocean liner for 3 months.
Oh, terrible, terrible. So what he would
Yeah,
do is
yeah.
the ship would go through the Suez Canal. So Hobbs would go down. He'd go landwise down to Marseille and catch the ship there, rather than risk the Bay of Biscay. Anyway, so he gets to Australia. He makes his debut at the MCG, scores 83. But his Test career really takes off in the next tour to South Africa, which is 1909 to 10,
South Africa.
when he
Yeah.
forms one of
Yeah.
the all-time famous Test partnerships with Wilfred Rhodes, who has the Yorkshireman, who has been promoted from 11 to open the innings, which anyone who's
All the way
batted at
through.
number 11 always kind of dreams. It's the kind of the model of what might happen. And so they end up opening the innings. They open 36 times in all, and I mean their average as openers is an incredible 61. I mean, amazing. The thing about Hobbs, I think, as a batsman, is that he's kind of self-taught. He
Yeah.
we said
Yeah.
he's used to good pitches, he's used to terrible pitches. He's again a bit like Bradman, really. He's had the obsessional self motivation that has enabled him to fashion his own batting technique. And I think also he comes on the scene, he kind of starts his career just as cricket itself is evolving. So it's a period when bowlers are starting to bowl googlies, when swing is starting to become something much that the bowlers can control much more effectively. And so Hobbs is coming in, unlike older batsmen, he isn't phased by this, and he is able to dominate this new type of bowling in a way that no one else can. And the
Yeah.
stats speak of his dominance, but so also I think does the grace and style with which he plays. He's clearly kind of very aesthetically pleasing. So Neville
Yeah.
Cardus, who was, he loved beauty in cricket, said, "I never saw him reduced to undignified pokes, prods, or pushes. I never saw him make a crude stroke." And this is a period when the convention is that that only gentlemen can play like that, and players are all kind of crabbed and pokey and boycott-esque. And Hobbs totally subverts that. Hobbs
Yeah.
is the most aesthetically pleasing batsman in England, despite being a pro.
Yeah. Without wanting to come across as a Marxist here,
Go
Tom,
for
I
it.
just think
Go
that's
for
another
it.
really fascinating thing. I just think it's another really fascinating thing to think. There was just this assumption, such was the definition. We talked in the past about players and gentlemen being this sort of crucial, critical, most popular game of the year. Which is ultimately rich people playing against less rich people, if you like. And there were assumptions made about how people can play, and those
Yeah.
assumptions weren't based on their abilities or their mindset or anything like that. It was purely based on their background and their class.
Yeah.
And Hobbs came out and put the light to that entirely, and really sort of helped evolve the game socially.
Yeah.
Purely not by making any political statement, not by going on marches, nothing like that. Just by literally the way that he played the game, evolved cricket socially in a tremendous amount. I just think it's an amazing realization, really.
Yeah, it is. And I think that, again, that's the parallels with Grace and Bradman, is that he is a cricketer whose influence and significance reverberates beyond the cricket ground. And
Mm,
this is why he is such a significant figure. But obviously it's also founded on the fact that he's just a brilliant batsman, and he seems to just get better and better and better, so that by 1914
yeah,
he's been playing for 9 years by this point. He has an absolute golden summer. He scores 11 centuries. He scores a double century, 226. And Wisden, you love Wisden at the Oval, John, don't you? Says of this,
I do.
his summer,
Yeah,
his cricket was perfect. So what could possibly go wrong?
perfect.
The
Yeah,
sun is out. Hobbs is
yeah.
scoring
Wow.
his centuries. But, John, the storm clouds of war are gathering. So,
They are
28th of June 1914 is chiefly famous for the fact that Surrey are playing Middlesex at the Oval. However, what is also happening on that day is that in Sarajevo, Archduke Franz Ferdinand is taking a wrong turning. And we all know what happens. First World War ends up breaking out. Now, again, a comparison with Bradman. Hobbs doesn't have a great war. He very much puts cricket first. And initially, it's a kind of financial disaster for him because he's been given a benefit match, which follows the declaration of war.
just crucial.
Yeah, and so the Oval gets requisitioned for the war effort, and this means that Hobbs can't play at the Oval, and so it gets moved to Lords, where of course it's foreign territory. And he doesn't really do very well, but Surrey are very good. I mean, they realize that this is a real problem for him, so they make up the shortfall for him. But it kind of sets the tone for the war that Hobbs is a bit out of sync with it. He doesn't sign up immediately, and in that he's unlike a lot of cricketers who do. So Lord Hawke, who you can imagine is all over cricketers joining up and being killed. He's very proud of the fact that 75% of all first-class cricketers sign up, but Hobbs is not among them. Instead, he works in a munitions factory, and he says quite reasonably that he's doing this because he's got a family by this point. They need him, and there is an assumption certainly in the early years of the war that married men with families should not go and sign up, that they should care for their families. And he says later that he just didn't realize how massive the war was going to be, which sounds insane, but when cricket is your life, perhaps that's plausible. And he gets,
I think so.
He basically, Lord Hawke is very cross about this. Lord Hawke feels that he should be going off and doing his bit. And what makes Hawke even more, I shouldn't call him
Lord
Hawke, should I? That's not
Lord
Hawke. His lordship. Hawke. What makes him even more furious?
His lordship to you, but he's frequently cross. His lordship frequently cross about a great many things.
Well, so he gets very cross in 1915 because Hobbs goes off and plays for the Bradford League, and there's a kind of first-class cricket is not being played. Football it's famously this is the heyday of women's football because there isn't any professional football. But the Bradford leagues do carry on, and Hobbs goes and plays for them, and his justification is people need to be cheered up. But then in 1916, conscription is brought in. Hobbs joins the Air Force as a mechanic. He ends up in France. He definitely sees action. Doesn't talk about his war service. But that there is, I think, a kind of slight sense of resentment expressed certainly by his brothers that he could have done a bit more. But I think that may also be expressive of the fact that his brothers are not as famous or rich as he is. So who knows? It does. Anyway, he comes out of the war. He survives the war. No great damage done to his reputation. And in fact, in the wake of the armistice, the following, so 1919, there's that they restaged the benefit match at the Oval that had been torpedoed in 1914, and this time it's a massive success. And he makes there's a big profit, and he invests it in a sports shop on Fleet Street, which he goes on to claim made him more money. He made more money from his shop than he ever made from actually playing cricket. And so with this income, he's able to buy himself a house off Clapham Common, so down by where Clapham South Tube is. And he's now, he's prosperous. He's middle class. He's got a lovely house. He's next to a common. He's come a long way. And the marker of this is that in that same summer of 1919, Surrey are very short-staffed, partly because of injuries and partly because loads of their playing staff are dead. They've been killed in the war. And so Surrey put out an 11 that is entirely full of professionals. There are no amateurs, And the convention, of course, is that amateurs should captain. But because it's all professionals, they ask Hobbs to captain it. So that is another,
There we go.
a straw in the wind.
Another
So
glass ceiling. Another glass
ceiling
ceiling smashed
broken.
right through.
Absolutely. The 20s that follow, this is the age of Hobbs Mania that we talked about. This is where he is, he's indisputably seen as the world's greatest cricketer. He's the most famous cricketer. Records are kind of flying left, right, and centre. And Hobbs claims that he was only half the player after the war that he was before. But this is, it's not true. I mean, he's amazing.
I mean, this is a
Amazing
man who
record.
scored 100 centuries after his 40th birthday.
Yes, absolutely. I mean,
You know,
he's all
it's
full
I
steam
think
ahead.
yeah,
So in this period, I
yeah,
guess, I mean, he's famous not just for his own records, but for the fact that he establishes two of the most famous partnerships in cricket history. So
yeah,
in Surrey, it's his partnership with Andy Sandham, isn't it? Who after
yes,
the war replaces Tom Hayward, who'd been Hobbs's partner before.
yeah.
So Mike Brearley in the Art of
One
Captaincy.
thing on Sandham,
Mm,
Tom. Just one thing on Sandham before we go into this, I think is fascinating. So we talked about the bridge that Hobbs creates between Grace and Bradman. I say this iconic partnership between Hobbs and Sandham that we're going to go on to talk about. This then creates a bridge between Hobbs and the Surrey era in the 1950s, because Sandham
mm,
goes on to be the very successful and famous coach of that Surrey side throughout the 1950s after he retires, and yeah, so there is a straight line that passes through Jack Hobbs' career that takes you all the way from W.G. Grace to the 1958 Surrey's seventh title in a row, in which Mickey Stewart was playing, who then captained Surrey to the championship in 1971. It's
yeah,
a really
the torch is
amazingly
passed
thick
down.
line.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, almost
So
literally, almost literally.
the the partnership is cited by Mike Brearley in the Art of Captaincy as the absolute model. So he says of Hobbs and Sandham, a level of understanding at which no words at all are needed, simply a look and an instantaneous response. I mean, I think it's fair to say that Sandham
Mm.
is rather like Hobbs had been in Hayward's shadow. Sandham is always in Hobbs's shadow, and in fact, it's kind of typical of Sandham, isn't it, that he doesn't play that many tests for reasons that we'll come to in a minute. But when he does, he plays against the West Indies. He scores he scores a triple century, and then
Yeah,
he never plays
my
cricket for
God.
England again after that. So
I mean, it's yeah. Yeah, he doesn't play many Test cricket, but much Test cricket. But when he does, my God, does he play?
he really does. Yes, and he obviously, I mean, he's a titanic figure for Surrey and in Surrey's history. So
Mm,
huge credit to him. So
mm.
that's one of the partnerships.
Another of the five. So we've already mentioned three of the five players to score 100 first class 100. Sorry, Hayward, Hobbs, and Sandham. I mean, what an era! What a time of partnerships. And also, I suppose you can say for Hobbs, how fortunate Hobbs was to be able to bat with figures like Hayward and Sandham. You know,
Yeah,
to be able to
obviously.
have the
Yeah,
ability to form those partnerships, have the luck to have figures of the scale of Hayward and Sandham, in the same eras as him, and how that helped him accumulate runs and play as he did, I think is something that's something incredibly fortunate for him.
and of course, in the Test arena as well, he'd been very fortunate in having Wilfred Rhodes, but Rhodes has retired by the 20s. And one of the reasons why Andy Sandham doesn't play as many Test matches as he might have done is because Hobbs has
Mm.
a very celebrated batting partner for the Tests,
My word,
which of
this man.
course is Herbert Sutcliffe. And
Yep.
Sutcliffe, unlike Hobbs, is not a naturally deferential man, and he's much more successful at kind of reinventing himself. So Sutcliffe is, I mean, he's also from kind of very humble background, but he kind of he recreates himself as a figure from an Agatha Christie. He's the kind of person who'd be, brought into a living room by Poirot. He's got,
Yes.
he's got a posh car. He's got a very unfeasibly posh accent. He's got fine tailoring.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
completely kind of
Yeah.
reinvented himself. Gets a Rolls Royce, all this kind of thing.
Yeah, would you believe it? He referred to gentlemen players by their first name.
Yeah, it doesn't call them sir. Hobbs always calls them sir.
Doesn't call them.
No,
Hobbs always called them sir.
he's
Yeah,
not having
no.
any of that.
Sutcliffe used their first name. Yeah, I don't imagine it was quite hello, Hawky, as you may have,
Hey, Hawko.
almost got to earlier. But
Yeah,
yeah, hello, Hawkster, the Hawkster.
the
But
Hawkster.
it's still,
Yeah.
yeah. Again, wouldn't have gone down well.
Well, the
Yeah.
other major difference between Hobbs and Sutcliffe is that Sutcliffe is a massive shagger. I mean, he just has to see a
Right.
lady and he's, hello, come for a ride in my rolls. And of course,
Yeah.
that's not Hobbs' vibe at all. Hobbs is very
No.
luxurious and monogamous and devoted to his wife. But that they make it, and maybe for these reasons that they're such different characters, they, they're incredible opening partnership. So just to read McKinstry's comments on this, during a decade from 1923, they hit 15 century stands together for England in test matches and achieved an incredible average for their partnership of 87. So that's even better than the one with Rhodes, which was 61. Still by far the highest, despite the vast expansion in international cricket since their retirement. In all matches, they had no fewer than 26 century stands. So that is just
and the vast
just
expansion
amazing.
in cover technology since their partnership as well, as much as anything else.
Yeah,
it's wild. It's wild to think of these achievements. It's just no, they're an amazing pair. Strong Surrey, strong Yorkshire, strong England, and but yeah, they're so brilliant together, but they're so different as people. I think it's it's fascinating. I'd have been fascinated to sit in a room with them and observe the dynamic.
And Hobbs is, although he's from Cambridge, he becomes the kind of the embodiment of Surrey. He's a great England batsman, but he is also a great Surrey batsman. And so when he retires from first class cricket in 1935, and he gets all kinds of national honours. So the King sends him a telegram, all that kind of stuff. But it's the honours that he receives from Surrey that really move him. So he's given life membership of the club. He had the Hobbs Gates are named after him, and he felt the Oval was his home, was his great stage. And so he said of the Oval that it is my favourite ground. I love playing there, and strangely, though I have done very well there, I detest Lords and always have done. So.
I mean,
we're not,
Jack,
we're not out to diss Lords in this in this podcast series.
No,
but
we're
I
not,
think
but,
if the England's greatest batsman, the master, just worth reflecting. The Oval was his favourite ground, as well as might have been, because he absolutely adorned it. And so that, ladies and gentlemen, that is your GOAT. That is your Surrey's greatest player. And I don't think anyone could credibly argue against him. So thanks very much for listening to us again. We will be back very soon with another episode. And John, this episode is going to be all the things that have been staged at the Oval that are not cricket. And there is so much.
And you will not believe where we'll get to with this one.
There's all kinds of mad stuff in this. So we hope you enjoy that. And in the meanwhile, thanks very much for listening. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.